Today, we're diving deep inside our own bodies and, believe it or not, into the brain of a tiny insect to figure out the secrets of our internal clock. So, how on earth does it all work? Let's get into it.
You know that feeling, right? You fly across a few time zones, and for days you just feel off. Totally exhausted, a bit foggy, everything's just kind of weird. Well, that's jet lag. And it is the single best piece of evidence that you have a powerful biological clock ticking away inside you, a clock that gets seriously confused when you suddenly rip up its schedule.
So, what even is this clock? I mean, it's not just a feeling or some kind of metaphor. No. It is a real, physical, biological machine that runs the show for pretty much every part of our bodies, from when we feel tired to how we process our food. Now, the scientific term for this is the circadian rhythm. It comes from the Latin circa dies, which literally means around a day. And that's exactly what it is, an internal pacemaker that runs on a cycle that's about 24 hours long. And that word endogenous is super important. It means this rhythm comes from within. Your body generates it all by itself. The sun helps, for sure, but it doesn't create it.
And you can see this perfectly in this chart. It's tracking a fruit fly's activity. So look at the top part. With a normal cycle of light and dark, the fly is busiest around dawn and dusk. Makes sense. But here's the amazing part. Look at the bottom half. When they put the fly in constant darkness, with no clues about what time it is, the rhythm just keeps on going. Those peaks of activity happen right on schedule. That's proof that the clock is 100% internal.
So, from observations just like that one, scientists figured out that any true circadian rhythm has to have these four key properties. One, as we just saw, it can free run all on its own without any outside help. Two, the cycle is close to 24 hours, but usually not exactly 24 hours. Three, it can be entrained, which is just a fancy word for synchronized, by things like light. And four, the clock is rock solid. It doesn't really speed up or slow down if it gets hotter or colder. Okay, so we've established these clocks are real. But the multi-million-dollar question is, how do they work? What are the actual gears inside this biological timer? Well, you'll be surprised to hear where the answer came from. Yeah, the big breakthrough, the discovery that unlocked our own internal clocks, didn't come from studying people. It didn't even come from studying mice, at least not at first. The hero of our story is the humble fruit fly. Drosophila melanogaster, you've definitely seen these guys buzzing around your fruit bowl. But it turns out they're the perfect little lab assistant for this kind of research. Their genetics are pretty simple, and their behavior is super easy to track. Scientists would literally put thousands of them into these tiny glass tubes and use a little infrared beam to see when they were moving around, 24/7, just watching and waiting for one that had a funky schedule. And all that watching paid off. It led to the single biggest discovery in this entire field, the fact that this incredibly complex 24-hour behavior was actually being controlled by just a few genes. You got to go back to 1971. Two scientists, Konopka and Benzer, did this absolutely brilliant experiment. They basically zapped flies with a chemical to cause random genetic mutations, and then they screened thousands of them, looking for any flies with broken clocks. And they found them. It was the first time anyone had proven that this internal timer wasn't just some vague biological process. It was written in the DNA. And the results were just wild. They found that mutations in one single gene, which they perfectly named the period gene, could completely change the clock's timing. One mutation gave flies a super fast 19-hour day. Another one gave them a slow, sluggish 28-hour day. And a third mutation just broke the clock, no rhythm at all. This was huge. A single gene was literally setting the pace of time for an entire animal. So wow, right? But that just leads to the next big question. How can a gene possibly act like a clock? Well, the answer is this incredibly elegant little system that works kind of like the thermostat in your house. At the heart of it all, inside every single cell, is something called a negative feedback loop. Now that sounds way more complicated than it is. The idea is actually beautiful in its simplicity. You have genes that turn on, they make some proteins, and then those very same proteins build up and eventually circle back to turn their own genes off. And the whole cycle takes about 24 hours. Let's walk through it. Okay, step one, in the morning, you have these activator proteins called clock and cycle. They're the on switch. They turn on the period and timeless genes. Step two, all day long, the cell starts making the proteins from those genes, period and timeless. They just slowly build up. Step three, Now, as night starts to fall, these proteins pair up. They head back into the cell's nucleus and they physically get in the way of clock and cycle. This is the negative feedback. They shut down their own production. And step 4, with production shut off, the proteins that are already there start to break down overnight. By morning, they're gone, the block is lifted, and clock and cycle are free to start the whole thing over again. It's a perfect, self-winding 24-hour loop. So that's the tiny machine taking away inside our cells. But how does that elegant little loop translate into a behavior we all know and, let's be honest, sometimes desperately need? I'm talking about sleep. And this right here is where it gets really incredible. That molecular feedback loop, it is not just some weird thing that fruit flies do. It's an ancient system for telling time that evolution loves so much, it's been saved and passed down for millions of years, from flies to mice, all the way to us. We are all using a version of the exact same genetic toolkit. I mean, just look at this. The fly clock is on the right, mouse clock on the left. Yeah, some of the gene names are a little different, but the basic structure, that core negative feedback loop, it's practically identical. It's like looking at our shared family history, written right there in our DNA. And it turns out these shared genes are directly tied to sleep. In flies, if you mess with their clock genes, you mess up their sleep. And guess what? In humans, it is the exact same story. Variations in our versions of those clock genes control our sleep/wake cycle, and mutations are directly connected to actual sleep disorders. Here's a real-world example. You see that protein CRY1 in the mouse clock? Well, this scientific paper found that a specific mutation in the human version of that gene is linked to something called delayed sleep phase disorder. What does that mean in plain English? It's the gene that can make you a night owl. It's just amazing. The research that began with tiny flies in the 1970s is now explaining why you can't fall asleep before 2 a.m. It's like these scientists said, even with all our modern tech, our phones, our alarms, our body is under the control of another timer, firmly anchored in our genes. It's this deep, ancient part of who we are, and we can't just ignore it. Which really brings us to the big final question, doesn't it? This clock was built over millions of years to sync up with the sun rising and setting. But now, we live in a world of 24/7 light. So, are we basically putting ourselves into a state of permanent jet lag? Something to think about tonight. Thanks for joining this explainer.